Hey everybody, I'm Madalyn Sklar, host of the Social ROI Chat. We had an awesome one today. I'm here with our special guest, Dr. Karen Sutherland. Hi, how are you doing? Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me back.
I know. I have to say, we don't normally bring back guests. We like to just keep getting new guests, but you were so incredible the first time around that we had to bring you back again. So it
Oh,
was
I feel honored. So thank you.
Well, it was our honor to have you back. And this was a really interesting topic today. I really enjoyed the discussion, and I know everybody got a lot out of it. So before we dive in and go kind of recap with the questions, can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm a lecturer at the University of the Sunshine Coast. I'm a lecturer in public relations, but now all of my courses are about social media. And so we're even starting a whole major in social media and a degree program next year, which is great. And my research is heavily focused on social media as well. And this topic actually came to light because I've been fortunate enough to be able to travel around to different countries, and there I've taken a real interest in the way social media is being used in those countries and the differences and the similarities. And so it was great to be able to share some of those experiences today.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And I'm so glad that Dr. Ai Zhang was also, she's one of our regulars on the chat, and she actually helps me greet all of our participants. And she travels quite a bit. She's currently in South Korea, but she goes to China from time to time. And it's interesting some of the things that she's told me in the past. And I know she's talked about it a little bit on the chat about how some of these platforms, the popularity of them, but then also how sometimes she can't post things, and there's a lot of frustration. And here I live in the United States and just take for granted that I can get online at any time. I'm not shut down. I can get on these platforms without any issues. So it's interesting hearing from other people in other parts of the world.
Absolutely, and it is a huge world, and in particular with social media. I mean, even in our own countries, it's moving so quickly, so it's very hard to keep track of what's going on everywhere. So it's so great when people, yeah, as you said, in different regions can come together and share their perspectives.
Absolutely. So the topic today was called Going Global, Social Media Around the World. And you're just the perfect guest for this. Um, let's start with question number one. And for anybody that's here watching us live, feel free to put a question into the comments so that we can address it. If you're watching the replay, you can also feel free to ask a question, and we'll keep an eye out for those. Let's start with question number one. How does social media adoption differ between countries?
Well, I guess I mean Australia has quite a big. It's the penetration rate of social media is it's in the 80% of internet users, so it's quite high. But in many sort of Asian countries, that it's just huge. Like I don't think I'm trying to think of the country that has the most, the highest penetration rate. I think it's the United Arab Emirates, according to Statista. But then below those countries, they're all Asian countries like South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong. And just from my experience, I haven't traveled much in Asia, but I was in Vietnam and Hong Kong where I took students on a social media study tour where we visited different digital marketing agencies and things. And I would have to say, particularly in Hong Kong, it's so connected in terms of social media and just the quality and bandwidth as well and speed of it is really quick. It was it was quite a difference to Australia.
That's so interesting. And I know during the chat, there were some stats that were posted. For those of you watching, if you missed the actual chat itself, be sure to go through the tweets as social ROI, the hashtag, and be sure to check those out. Question number two, from the countries you visited, which social media platform is the most popular, and why do you think that's the case?
Well, from where I've visited, so I won't rattle off all the countries, but from where I've gone, it's Facebook by far. That was, and also WhatsApp. So that was either, like, a lot of the times you were asked, "Are you on WhatsApp? Are you on Facebook?" And they were the two that most people were using, and that was in yeah, Hong Kong, Vietnam, in India as well, and even in Australia, WhatsApp is quite popular. Not as popular as some platforms, but it is still used quite a lot more to, I think, the younger generation. It sounds like I'm really old, but yeah, younger people, they're right, into the messaging apps more so than, say, Facebook. So it would be those two. And why? I think with Facebook, I think it's just really well known, and it has so many different functions within it. And I think, WhatsApp is just an easy way and cheap way to communicate as well. So I think that's really what it comes down to, being easy and inexpensive.
Sure, that makes sense. And it's interesting here in the States, WhatsApp is something I had never used. I don't know anyone that uses it, but when a good friend of mine in Australia wanted us to connect on our phones, that was the app we ended up using. And so that's the only time I've ever used it, is for one friend in Australia. But so interesting to find out that in other parts of the world, it is super popular. Very interesting information. Where's a good place to go to get stats on all of this? Where do you recommend?
Well, every year, we are social, in combination with Hootsuite, come out with a global report, and so there's one out for this year as well, and that's really comprehensive, and it draws on all the sort of statistical sort of bodies in each country to bring it all together, and it has an overview, but then it has country profiles as well, which is like, for marketers working in global regions. It's really interesting just to get a better feel if you're not actually there experiencing it. And another one is Statista's pretty good. Like, it does show you, like, you have to pay for more comprehensive stuff, but it does give you a little snapshot on things like, active social media penetration in each country, and a comparison, and the platforms being used and things like that. So that would be my two go-tos. There's a lot of other places too, but just as a starting point, yeah.
That's really interesting. I would love to get the links from you because I'd like to post them when you get the chance.
Sure,
If you could
absolutely.
send those to me, yeah, I want to
Yeah.
post those. And Kevin's here, by the way. Hi to Kevin. And
I,
he thought it was interesting that WhatsApp is not popular in the US. I mean, maybe it is with some of the younger kids. I know they love messaging apps, but my understanding is when they're doing messaging, they're using Instagram and using the DM in Instagram. And if they're using Facebook, they're doing the private messaging, they're doing Messenger on there.
yeah,
But interesting. And he says in some countries, people run entire businesses on WhatsApp.
yeah,
Wow. It's just, when you have the apps that are the standard that everyone uses in your country, you just don't realize the impact of other apps in other countries. So I find it to be really fascinating because
yeah,
it is a big world, and there are other people using other things. I know there was another app that Dr. I had mentioned that I never even heard of before when she was talking about the ones popular in China.
yeah. So WeChat is huge in China. So I
I,
I think
yeah,
it's over like 90 million users, active users. I think it's per week. Like, that's a 90 million. It just blows my mind, And so
that's wild.
it's huge. And then when you compare it to other platforms, you're like, wow, we think that we use the most popular ones, but there's a whole other world, a whole other, other interactions and a whole other dimension to social media going on that we just have no idea about.
There really is really interesting. And there was a tweet. I think Kevin put this out during question number 2, and it's on the Managed Flitter Twitter account. And he posted a Statista link that showed breakdown of use of Instagram by country and
Mm-hmm.
showing United States, and then number 2 was Brazil, and then
Yeah,
number 3 was India. Really
yeah,
interesting that Japan was much further down on that list.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, and also and Russia is a big user of Instagram as well. Like I forget, I think it's in the We Are Social report. It just shows, yeah, that they're a big user as well. And you just don't think. I've got a few Russian followers, but you know, and I went on a tour of India a couple of years ago. I met some Russian people there, and they were big on Instagram. And but yeah, you just don't realize how popular, you know, certain platforms are in each country.
Yeah, really interesting. So let's move on to question number three. How
Mm-hmm.
does mobile internet usage in your home country compare to other countries?
Well, I think it's in Australia we're about middle of the range compared to usage. So we have a really high number of like it's a I think I looked at the stats of smartphone sort of penetration, and normally like it's over 100% in terms of, you know, a lot of people have more than one phone, and you know it's huge like the take up, but actual mobile internet we're about in this, like the studies that I've seen, we're about in the middle of the range. Um, in places like I was in Hong Kong and Vietnam, it was huge. But I think touching on like another question you asked, I think a lot of that has to do with sort of free Wi-Fi. Because I found in Hong Kong and in Vietnam, in sort of public places and in shops and restaurants, it's just you ask for the Wi-Fi password like you would a glass of water, and it's just
Wow.
freely offered. It's just a common thing. It's, you know, but in Australia, like some places do it, but it's not as freely available. And so I think, yeah, I think free Wi-Fi is definitely going to increase the use of mobile, you know, internet use.
And is this because people don't have internet on their phone, so they need the Wi-Fi, or is it because it's just really pricey
I think
for
it's
them
price.
to?
I think it's price. They just want to save their data. So yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
it's easier. And I know too, like in India, I was on roaming because I couldn't stay away from social media that long. So but I found that sometimes it would just drop out for a day, and I couldn't, you know, so I had to use Wi-Fi because there was nothing else. Like the actual you know, the other part of my plan, like I couldn't access the internet, so Wi-Fi was the only option.
Right. Wow. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so we'll move on to question number four. Can you think of any unique ways social media platforms are being used in different countries?
Yeah, well, when I was in Vietnam in Ho Chi Minh, I think 2016, so a little while ago, but that was before Instagram had sort of shopping functions. So that sort of has come out just recently, and so I discovered there that yeah, people used Instagram not so much to show photos of their food unless they were selling it, or you know, or to sort of do selfies and things. They were actually using the platform to sell products. So what would happen is, for example, a seller would put you know, maybe a dress or a piece of clothing, you know, take a photo and post it. The people following them, you know, or they use the right hashtags. If someone was interested, they'd send them a direct message, and they'd organise a price and work out a price. The buyer would give them their details, and then within half an hour, someone was on a scooter, you know, on a motorbike, dropping it over, and they just paid cash on delivery. So in Vietnam, like it's such an entrepreneurial culture that they were looking at social media more so around, you know, how can I actually use this for business purposes. So I found that really interesting. It was way ahead of you know, Instagram actually adding that function.
Right. I think it's super fascinating because, like, I'm sure that's something that is done everywhere to a certain extent, but
Yeah,
not on a grand scale. It sounds like they're doing it on a grand scale. Like everybody knows to do this. I don't know anybody here that knows to do that. I don't know to do that. But how cool. I mean, but of course, you want to make sure it's reputable. You're dealing with someone that's not going to rob you and take
yeah,
your money, not provide, you know, interesting though, very interesting. You know, when you had mentioned that on the chat, I was like, whoa, I had no idea that was going on somewhere in the other part of the world. So very
yeah.
fascinating.
I heard too. I think I forget which country it was, but it's actually Instagram's being used to actually sell sheep and livestock. Uh,
Really?
yeah, yeah, in a similar way. Obviously,
Wow.
not putting it on a motorbike and driving over,
Right.
but like just they show the cattle on in different photos, and then the price is organised, and then and it's that sort of interaction and transaction is takes place actually using Instagram. So I just find that really interesting.
Yeah, and I can totally see where you're having a conversation with someone. You say, "Hey, just go over to my Instagram. I've got photos there. You can see," and then just send me a private message from there, as to what you're interested in. You know, it, we're definitely going to see these social sites evolve, with Instagram now going in that direction where you can purchase. Um, it seems like that is the direction these are all starting to take. Pinterest, doing that as well. What do you think about that? Is Pinterest even popular in other parts of the world? Is still popular here, but not at the level it once was.
No, well, I think it's dependent on certain target audiences. So in Australia, women it's mainly a female demographic that uses it, but it's for things like, for designers and fashion, wedding planners. It depends on the actual, business or reason for using it, and for people actually going and looking on there. So yeah, and I think adding this sort of ability to shop within the platforms, it makes you wonder what is going to actually happen to things like eBay and sites like that. Obviously that's more an auction site, but will
Right.
that become a feature? Will people be able to sort of bid on items within social platforms? That would be sort of an interesting sort of way to go.
I totally agree, and this is probably Kevin using the managed flitter accounts, and if not, comment. Let me know who it is that says this. But we trade cattle on Facebook in regional Australia too, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
Like, who knew that things like that were happening in other parts of the world? So, but then over there is natural and common, and and just
Yeah.
super interesting. Just reminds you
And
how big of a world we live in.
I know, and they might see us like they're taking photos of our food. They're like, why are you doing that? Are you going to sell
Exactly.
it? Like what?"
It's like, here's what I had for breakfast. It's like, well, why'd you post that? Right. Not everybody really thinks of like, I'm posting something to sell something, right?
Yeah.
I know here in the States, everybody's big on just posting things to spark conversation and not necessarily to sell something. you
Yeah.
know so yeah, interesting for sure. Question number 5: what are some of the biggest challenges for social media marketers in different countries?
Yeah, I mean it's a common challenge that I think all marketers have, and that's really knowing the audience to be able to create content to cut through. And so in countries with huge, it's hard enough with countries with small populations, but with big populations, you can imagine the amount of content that's being pushed through, and then trying to create something that's going to actually resonate and reach and gain the attention of who you're trying to target. I think that's common. But then I'd like the example I gave in our chat. In Vietnam, the government has a tendency to actually switch off Facebook sometimes. So there was a case couple of years ago where I don't know, it was environmental protesters. There was some, like, I think some company was dumping waste into a river. It was killing fish and wildlife, things like that. So on a Sunday they would use Facebook during the week, really, but more so on a Sunday, to organise protests, public protests about what was happening. And so the government could see that that's what they were using Facebook for, to sort of mobilize people. So they would just switch it off. They would just switch it off. They turned it
Wow.
back on during I think on the Monday, but yeah, like they just would switch it off. And then they saw people then move to Instagram, so they were doing it there. And then I think they started to do that there as well.
Oh
So
my gosh.
yeah, and you can imagine, like in Vietnam, Facebook is huge, and it's where most marketers spend a lot of their dollars. So imagine you have a campaign, you poured so much money into it, and then it's just switched off for an entire day.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just it's a just that, like not knowing, what's going to happen, and just having it completely out of your control, which I think in countries like Australia and the US, we don't really have that issue.
Right. Yeah, same here. I mean, I can't even imagine that just gets shut off and doing it on those terms.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I mean, we take for granted here that we have free speech, that we're allowed to protest if if it's, as long as it's peaceful, and but yeah, over there they just didn't want that to happen. So goodbye Facebook.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
really really interesting to hear about that. Very sad. And I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, like, what if you invested money in an advertising campaign and shut off? So, a lot of businesses could lose a lot of money due to, these types of shutoffs that are going to affect businesses. Not
Yeah, and
good.
then they're without warning too, so you can't really prepare. You
Yeah.
just don't know when it's going to happen.
Wow. Which country is most active on social media?
Well, I think according to that global report that came out earlier this year from We Are Social, it's the Philippines, which is quite interesting, and they spend nearly 4 hours a day on social media.
Wow.
Yeah, so
That
that's
that's
a
that's
lot.
the average. I mean, like for me personally, I do that much or more every day, but that's, I'm a marketer, digital marketer. But like for
Exactly.
that being the average in that
Yeah,
country, that's like
yeah,
mind blowing.
yeah. Yeah, it really is. And similar, like a study came out recently from Roy Morgan in Australia about young women's use of social media here. And so I think the average for Australians is about 6 hours a week, so which is pretty good. But women would, like, for young women, it was like 6 hours every day that they were connected. They're doing like more in a day than really what the average Australian is on every week. So that's quite
Wow.
telling.
That sure is. Very
Yeah.
interesting for sure. Wow, that just blows me away. Um, and you did post on the chat, if anybody goes back to the hashtag on Twitter, you did post a nice little breakdown, time spent on social media, showing this graph, um, January
Yeah. And what I can
2018.
do, I can post that in the comments as well for this chat. So,
Yeah, that would be great if you
yeah.
could do that because I think it was very interesting. And let's wind it down with the last question from the chat. And we touched on it a little bit already. How
Yeah.
does Wi-Fi accessibility influence the use and adoption of social media in different countries?
Well, I think it directly influences it, and particularly free Wi-Fi at that. And so I think, I mean, if you're able to actually access it on your mobile, like, and for free, you're more likely to use it. Um, so in, as I said, in like in Hong Kong and Vietnam, and even in like the cities in India, it people, I think, were on it more because they could be, and using someone else's Wi-Fi was the reason for people doing that. Um, I found in places like, I went to Portugal recently, but I was on the island of Madeira, which was just beautiful. And but what I found there is that it wasn't as like, you really had to normally ask to get the Wi-Fi password. That they were quite happy to give it to you, but I found the culture was very different. People weren't out at restaurants with their phones on the table, or looking at their phone when they're with their families. It was everyone was very focused on being together, which it was like that in Australia about 5 years ago. So it's just interesting. So maybe that will change as time goes on. So yeah, I think it definitely has a huge impact.
Right. I totally agree. Very interesting with that. And, earlier in the chat, Kevin said that, let me see if I can find his where he said that, here it is. He said that we have great and relatively cheap mobile internet in Australia, so less need for Wi-Fi. And that's how it is generally here in the US as well. So interesting how in other countries it's more of a premium to be able to get this like free, I imagine it encourages people to go out more so they can go get that free internet.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right, definitely. Because yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you? You know, why wouldn't you go out to it if you could get it for free?
Yeah. So interesting. Well, this has been a very fascinating chat today. I really appreciate you coming on and doing the live stream with us so we could go a little bit beyond the 280 characters and hear you discuss these questions with us. So thank you so much. What is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, I have a Facebook page. It's Dr. Karen Sutherland, so I can put a link in the comments, and I can put all my handles and stuff in the comments if you want
That
to
would be
connect.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, and my email too. Feel free. So I'm always
That
up
would
for a
be
chat about social media.
That would be great. So if anybody has any questions, wants to get in touch with you, they can do so. Thank you so much, Dr. Sutherland. Really appreciate your time today. It was really great information.
That's great. Thanks for inviting me. It was lots of fun. Thanks.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you everybody for watching. We'll be back next week with another great Twitter chat. So until then, we'll see you back out on Twitter. Bye, everybody.
Bye.